I've always been, in computing, always been interested in what people would describe as applied problems, and I would describe as real problems. That is, things that people actually care about, and so there's a certain frustration you experience in the research world where if you think you've come up with some good ideas, you've carried them a certain distance, you write a paper on it, the graduate students involved graduate, and it kind of stops there. And so it's always hard to make something really prove itself in the real world in that form. So I became interested in this because I was developing things that I thought should live longer than a research paper. And I think the research papers clearly have an impact, but it's amazing the degree that technology transfer really takes place with people. You know, you have to have a person that really gets it, really understands it, and also things that are born in the research world are not really ready for the real world. Generally speaking, there's somebody who has to view, this is my baby and I'm going to raise it in the real world, so it's really competitive. And so I think you have to be part of the technology transfer process. So I suppose that's a long way of saying that, you know, one gets very interested in technology transfer when you realize that the alternative feels like technology death at times.
Yeah. So I think for a lot of the students who take my class, they often struggle with, well, how do I know that this is the right idea? And as you emphasize, you know, often these early stage ideas, there is still some way to go from the research stage to it being sort of a practical applied solution, and you can see sort of that there's some distance to go. And so with you know, with say Granite Systems, how did you know that, you know, this was sort of the idea to pursue with technology transfer?
Well, with Granite, it was kind of a curious mixture because I knew Andy Bechtolsheim from his days as a graduate student, and he had gone off and founded Sun Microsystems, and I'd gone off and gotten tenure at Stanford in the intervening time, and you can tell which one was the more lucrative effort over that time period. But one thing that we reconnected on was that there was tremendous kind of political push, if I can call it this, techno-political push, in a technology called ATM, which I thought was a creation of the devil, frankly, and discovered that Andy did too, although he never put it quite that strongly. And one thing that's great about a whole bunch of people doing a whole bunch of stupid stuff is that if you're smart enough, it creates an opportunity to do something smart, because usually smart eventually wins over dumb, no matter how many people are doing the dumb thing. And so there seemed like an opportunity to do something with Ethernet that was a well-known technology, but it was growing, but there was an opportunity together with VLSI technology to sort of take it to another level in terms of performance and cost reduction and all sorts of properties. And so that to me was really the founding premise of Granite. And I must admit, you know, I think what I like is when you start a company, you have to have at least one good thing going for you, but it's a lot better to have two or three. That is, you know, to say the market is doing this, the technology is doing that, and the competitors are stuck in something or other. You know, when you put the three together, you feel like you have more of an opportunity than just one, because just one can be not enough to get you up to escape velocity. One of the things I find fascinating about Silicon Valley is if you dig deep enough, you find that a lot of companies had a business plan to do X, and yet they shifted to Y, and that's why they're still alive. Yeah. And this was the case with when we founded Arastra. The idea was effectively focused on reliability of WAN links. And we thought we had some good ideas there, and we thought we could make a company out of this. And we discovered that the market dynamics were different than we imagined, and it was just, I could go into painful details, but fundamentally this company was not going any place on that premise. And so it was at that point, I think it was really Andy who recognized, well, the other thing we could do is that the market was going to move from 1 gigabit to 10 gigabit, and that it's funny, in computing we often talk about these changes as though it's just kind of like going from blue cars to red cars. Where's the big opportunity? But if you put it in everyday terms, you say, well, people are driving at 50 miles an hour and now they're going to go 500 miles an hour. Well, often the technology changes and the way things get used changes. And so to me, the opportunity was that there was this dislocation in the marketplace based on 1 gig to 10 gig, but it wasn't the speed change. It was the fact that the existing companies viewed that 10 gig was the gold-plated, uplink, expensive sort of thing, which was a price umbrella over their other products that were all 1 gig. And so there was that going for us. And then there was this emergence of merchant silicon people who had been there for years, sort of going through kindergarten and grade school and middle school and so on, but now they're ready to graduate from high school and do really competitive switch products. So you could build switches using other people's silicon, which dramatically reduces the cost of things. And the other thing that was going on was there was this change in the marketplace where previously all the most the major markets were enterprise. That is, how do you get data to somebody's window machine in their cubicle, and a service provider, which is wide area sort of stuff. But what was emerging was this notion of building these data centers, a la Google and Amazon and so on, where you have a huge number of servers that are logically one big compute facility, and the backbone of that is networking. And in that world, we could see that what was evolving was these people had built things that are all connected by 1 gig, but you just have to imagine, if you don't know, as Andy would know, the roadmap that Intel has with processors, that they have to go to 10 gig server connect, and you have to drive down the cost of 10 gig, and you have a very different set of requirements for the cloud, so to speak, the large data centers. So, again, my rule of, you can't have one reason to found a company, you have to have several. There was several reasons that all came together that said there was an opportunity. Now, on top of that, I happen to think that I had some good ideas about how to structure software to build something that's highly fault tolerant and scalable and modular and so on, and a better way of building switch software. And what's, I think, underappreciated is the amount of software that runs in a switch or router. And the problem of building something that runs 24/7, high reliability, high performance, deals with all sorts of craziness, is talking to all these other network switches and so on constantly, having that be rock solid reliable is a very interesting challenge. So I thought I had some good ideas, and I'm sort of arrogant and ambitious enough that I wanted to try them in the real world, and that ended up being an opportunity to do that. You have to look at a market as a battlefield, and many students haven't paid enough attention to history. You find that a lot of battles have been won by people who are amazingly outmanned because they understand the battlefield. I mean, understand it down the level of there's marshes here, there's not marshes there, or how things are working out there. And so when you go into a market, I think you have to say, okay, who's fighting with who, and who's got leverage over who, and who are the strengths, and so on. And the market we're walking into is basically saying we can improve your WAN experience. Well, the telcos are already there, and they can do whatever they want because they're so huge and so established, and their game was to charge people a lot of money to get connected to them at all, but then once they were customers, they really didn't charge that much for wide area services. And so in this model of saying, well, we can improve your WAN performance and reliability by doing all this fancy stuff, the telcos could just underprice any benefit we were delivering because they wanted to own the customer. And you'd think logically, I mean, in some senses, like walking into a transportation system where you say, we can make your trip so much better, assuming that the cost of taking a taxi to the airport is a small cost of taking the flight to Paris. But when you get into the market, you discover that, well, the airlines own the taxi business, so by the time you paid for the taxi, it's almost nothing to get to Paris. And you think, whoa, suddenly this battlefield looks very different. So that was basically what we encountered. It was, you might say rigged, but fundamentally the big players had a particular strategy that made what our business proposition not very compelling.
What words of advice or wisdom would you pass along to current students or recent graduates who are thinking about getting involved in entrepreneurship, or more generally thinking about what career direction to pursue?
Well, you know, the thing that comes to mind is this advice I got from a theater instructor I had years ago, who said, whenever anybody comes to me and asks me whether I should be in theater, I say no, because if they take no for an answer, then they shouldn't be in theater. And if they say, screw you, I'm going to go there anyway, then at least there's some hope. So I guess I usually tell people if they want to start, should they start a company, I say no. So first of all, I think you have to realize that you hear about the successes and you hear about the, you know, the good times and so on, but at least I feel I've been incredibly fortunate, but still it's a demanding experience. And I think the thing that you know, you really want to take seriously is that when you start a company, it's not just you, it's you have to sell a vision to a bunch of people who are going to be joining you as employees and are going to commit a portion of their career to this. So you really have a responsibility for people's, a key part of their lives. So, you know, I've seen a few companies where they've run out of money, they're shutting down, and people have put heart and soul in it. And so you just don't go into this lightly. You really say, you know, you really, really have to be committed to make it work. And I think, so I would say, you know, you have to have this commitment where everybody you know says, don't do it, and you say, I'm still going to do it, I have to do it. To have that commitment and to have to just say, I'm not going to see if this works, I'm going to make it work. I'm putting my real, everything I got on the line, because it's not just you, it's everybody else you're going to pull into this. So I think that's the number one element, is that. You know, I think one of the things I'd also mention working with Andy is that, you know, I think Andy is an entrepreneurial genius. I've never encountered anybody in the league that he's in terms of understanding markets, products, and all the various dynamics involved, and yet he still goes and seeks out advice from people. And you know, I think that if you're starting a company, you have to really be prepared to spend lots of time trying to get as much wisdom as possible out of people. And they can't tell you what to do, but You have to be able to seek out that information. You have to be able to look at venture capitalists and say, this is not Mr. Fat Cat Moneybags who's going to write a check. This is somebody who has a lot of experience with companies in early stages that can assess things. So I want to get his brain, his checkbook is secondary. I want to get as much as I can out of his brain.
Right.
And I think that, taking that attitude is absolutely critical as well. And then, since I think everything comes in threes, the third thing I'd say is that you really want to have multiple things going for you in a company. And they have to be real things. It's not good enough to say, I can develop something that's slightly better than what's out there, because the world is moving, and often it's moving faster than you know who else has got a competing product that hasn't been announced yet. So I think one really wants to look carefully for these convergences of multiple factors that create this opening. And again, I perhaps am, as an academic, I'm perhaps overly frightened by the marketplace as a battlefield, but I think when you view your David going out onto these battlefields where many times there are Goliaths out there already, that own patches of this ground, that operate in certain ways, you say, I don't want just one slingshot, I want as many different angles as possible, and I need to be very, very nimble to find where I can survive in that market. And I think getting that notion in that this is not a peaceful activity. This is going out there and sort of earning your spot to survive.